When I was a kid in the 1970s, what I imagined the future to be, like a lot of us probably did, was flying cars and moon colonies and, video phones. Um, so here we are in 2022, and we have one of those three things. But tonight Tom is going to talk about is imagining a different future, one where the world comes together to tackle climate change and to stop overheating the planet. So what type of world are we trying to build, and what can we each do to make that world a reality? Those are the kinds of questions that Tom's going to address tonight. And just a little bit about Tom. He is a retired Chief Information Officer, a member of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, chair of their Chicago area electric vehicle and presentations committees, and proud owner of 2 electric vehicles and 27 solar panels. And he is also part of Nest's transportation team. Tom?
Shall we go?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll be honest with you, this was a difficult, imagining a carbon-free future. More difficult than I thought, because while I've done a lot of presentations, this is a big topic. So what we'll do today, and we'll definitely have questions, as I'm sure there'll be questions at the end, is we'll identify the problem. Many of you know the problem, but very quickly I'm going to, we have to understand the current state in order to be able to understand where we're going. Recognize the causes and consequences of where we are today, define the scientific consensus, and there is, and then envision a future state, and that would be the carbon-free future that we're talking about here. So to identify the problem, the current state, we have to understand that we're heating up. 19 of the 20 hottest years on record have been since 2002. And the hottest of all have been in the last 7 years. So, essentially, we're talking about global warming here as a core root cause problem. And that root cause problem obviously causes, you're all aware of, tremendous disasters and farmland and droughts and fires all over the world, and, hurricanes and tornadoes. As you can see, these are all new things. All these pictures happened this year, and it happened the year before and the year before that. And you see the bomb cyclone here, rain like we've never seen before, and even floods in Naperville many times since I moved here in 1995, and a tornado this year, as you can see the picture right there on the right. And just the final slide on disasters, beautiful town in Germany here. Unfortunately, they had a bomb cyclone type of rain event that destroyed most of it. And this is increasing, as well as becoming more intense. So this is a problem getting worse as time goes on, if you take and stack the graph here. So now let's go on to the causes, and you may suspect what it is, the issue of emissions, but let's just make sure everybody knows that we're spewing 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of our atmosphere every 24 hours, as if it were an open sewer. In our atmosphere, the effective atmosphere is about 65 miles high, and the sun blasts through that, no problem at all. Some of the rays can get out, but many of the rays can't get out. So it's kind of like your car, on a hot summer day, you're sitting out there, and if you leave the windows up, you die. It's a serious problem. So you need to roll the windows down. Well, what's happening here is the worldwide thermostat, which is largely controlled by how many greenhouse gases are in this thin shell of our atmosphere, this skin of a peach. That's going to regulate whether the temperature is going up or down. And it isn't the intensity of the sun, and it's not the global maximum and all these kinds of things. This is about greenhouse gas emissions. So, there was a time in pre-industrial, before the Industrial Revolution, when, we've always had, hurricanes and everything else, and the sinks that absorb the emissions in nature, and even the early emissions from man is no problem. We had, lots of trees, and we had a balance between the two, about 280 parts per million. Unfortunately, we've started significantly adding to that and cutting a lot of these trees down and burning a lot of them, which releases the emissions that they've captured, carbon capture in the trees themselves, releasing it back into the atmosphere. So we're at 415 parts per million. And I was just informed, I think it was yesterday, that really we're at about 420 now. So if you look at the axis on the right, you see carbon dioxide levels since 1880 and how they've gone up here. And you can see correlating with that, the axis on the left, which is the temperature as recorded. And you can see the correlation between the two of these things. And if you would extrapolate into the future, if we don't do something, we got a serious problem. Not only that, we actually have a serious problem right now, let alone if it got worse. And so what's important about this is to understand it isn't just our emissions, it's our cumulative emissions. Because most of this stuff stays in the atmosphere for long periods of time. In fact, if we were to stop emissions altogether, it would take over a century for atmospheric greenhouse gases to drop down to 1980 levels. This is scary stuff. And if you think about it, China is the greatest emitter. The USA is number 2, but almost double if you look at cumulative emissions. The United States is the greatest emitter in history, not China. We're almost double China. So what are the consequences of this? So you look at this and you say, well, first of all, the same source of these greenhouse gases is pollution, poisonous pollution, like carbon monoxide. And 40% of the population lives in areas that do not meet EPA health standards. And about a half of it's, the stuff on the left, the factories and power plants, and the other half's transportation. And worldwide air pollution is killing 9 million people a year, actually more than practically anything, which is pretty scary. So we also have to look at the cost impact of this, $2.9 trillion a year from pollution. And if we were to move on from pollution and look at weather disasters, we would add 2.5 trillion to that just in the last decade, up 1 trillion from the previous decade. So between pollution, poisonous pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions and the result, we do tremendous damage to the health of people and the infrastructure, as you see in this picture here, whether it's roads and bridges. It's so good to hear that we had bipartisan agreement on a 1.2 trillion for infrastructure rebuilding, because we've had so much of it damaged or simply not maintained. But the ability to keep up with that, even if that was enough, it's not enough. It's about half of what actually was wanted. We really got a serious problem, because this is going to get worse if we don't start to do something here. So right now, climate change is disrupting the natural ecosystems in a way that's making it way better for infectious diseases. So think COVID-19. Well, we had a sister virus, SARS-CoV-2. Well, we had SARS-CoV-1 back in the early 2000s, coronavirus, and we had MERS, and there's other things that are really exacerbated by heat. And in fact, the Lancet, a world-respected organization, says climate change is a medical emergency, and they said it 6 years ago. And even the conservative U.S. Department of Defense 6 years ago said climate change will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic diseases, and disputes over refugees around the world. So is this all true? Well, yeah, it's all true. The scientific consensus on climate change has changed. It's gone from 97% to about 99% right now. Now, one thing you all should remember is most people think the consensus is about 26%. That a lot of scientists agree, but a lot of scientists don't agree, but it's not. That's not true at all. So look at the American Medical Association, the American Lung Association, the National Academy of Scientists. You can see them on the screen. There's agreement on the problem. And if we look at our own government, in the previous administration, we had 18 departments, and every few years they have to put out a climate assessment called the Global Change Research Program. And under, I think it's NOAA's leadership, they all get together and decide from their various perspectives do we have a problem here? And what is the problem? And so during the administration, the previous administration, while many politicians were saying, hey, this climate change is no big deal, or it's not real, or, it's minor. Actually, they published a report that says thousands of pages. I worked hard to boil it down into just a few bullets. The Earth's climate's changing faster than any point in modern history. The evidence is overwhelming. Most of the problems are a result of us. The impact is now being felt everywhere. Threats to society are rising, and efforts to contain the crisis do not approach the scale needed to avoid substantial damages to the US economy, to the environment, and to human health. Pretty serious stuff. And in addition, if you look at the IPCC, hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but lots of scientists, let's put it this way, around the world get together, as you know, and they put out this report, thousands of pages. And they're saying CO2 concentration is the highest in 2 million years. Sea level rise is the fastest in 3,000 years. Arctic sea ice is the lowest in 1,000 years. And finally, glaciers are retreating at an unprecedented rate in at least 2,000 years. So much of that. So now we have to get into what is it that we're trying to do here. So, well, we don't want to keep doing this, right? This is the problem. So what we have to do is we have to say, wait a minute, doing the same thing over and over again, expect different results. Well, that's the definition of insanity. So we have to move on from that and realize we have to change. So the question is, what kind of change? Well, some people think incremental change would be fine. The current system is sound. We just got to tweak it, only improvements. And, we've got time. And other people say, well, no, we've got to do transformational change because, the current system's not sound. Improvements insufficient. We need to have widespread change. And there's no time for gradual incremental change. But number two is hard, and number two is scary, and many people don't want to do number two because they're afraid. Many people know, in my opinion, that we need to do number two, but they're afraid. So we have to think about fears and what motivates people as well. So what are the experts saying we need to do? It's really pretty simple. In 2018, they said reduce greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030, achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And by the way, when they said that, they said, keeping the temperature under 2 degrees, we're at 1.1 now, actually maybe 1.2. But anyway, we had a 50-50 chance. So if you were getting on a plane, as Greta Thunberg says, and you only had a 50% chance of arriving okay, you'd be pretty concerned. So that's where we were. And I think now it's dropped way below 50% now. So we obviously have to change. So now the bulk of this presentation is going to be on what we're going to change. So I've described the current state. It's red, it's problem. CH4, methane, carbon dioxide. We have to take the success path to go up these stairs to the desired situation, which is the carbon-free future, or what I often call the new tomorrow. We have to get from here to there. So let's talk about how we can get from here to there. The root cause of these emissions in the heat and disasters and all that are about emissions. So let's take that as a priority and say, what does the EPA have to say about that? Well, they say that transportation is the #1 problem in the United States. It's 29% of the problem. Electricity generation is 25%, industry 23%. And agriculture and forestry and land use used to be, they used to capture the carbon. It was a net, capture, it was carbon capture technology almost. But now it's 10% and buildings are 13%. And even though number 6, the circular economy, isn't an emission per se, it's something we need to do to help all the others reduce, be more efficient, like recycling, et cetera. So let's tackle each one of these and paint the future as to where we need to be. So anything you see in these slides that are green are things we can do. We have the ability to do them, and the white things maybe industry or politicians have got to do more of. So first of all is we need to switch to zero emission light duty vehicles. So that's 58% of the transportation problem. So in other words, our cars, pickup trucks, cars, SUVs are 58% of the problem. So we have to switch to zero emission vehicles like battery electric vehicles. So hybrids were great 10 years ago. Plug-in hybrids were great, I don't know, 7 years ago, or whatever. But these are now like natural gas. They're not good enough, right? Going from coal to natural gas is better on emissions, but most of us will admit it's not good enough. So we need to go to zero emission vehicles, knowing that the grid isn't completely green, but as the grid goes green, they will become more green over time. We have to work from home as much as possible. That's been done a lot during the pandemic. Avoid driving when possible by more walking and biking, clearly, and use more public transportation. Now, in the white at the bottom are things we can lobby. We can vote for people that want to do the right things down there, but we can't change pace, what pace has to do for electric buses tomorrow. Now, at Climate Reality, we're doing a lot with the CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, and PACE to help them see the new tomorrow, but I can't change that. I can do an electric vehicle, which I have done. You can do an electric vehicle, and I want to show you ways to take a look at that. Not everybody can do it, but I think most people can move that way. So here's an example of 9 very popular ones. So I wanted to paint a picture so that you can see this new tomorrow, because this new tomorrow is actually here. You can go out and buy these. Of course, demand for cars and used cars is pretty high right now. It's hard to get them or get the one you want sometimes. I think that Tesla Model 3 in the top right, is I think 4 to 6 month waiting period right now. So get your name in. If you like that car, that's the lower end model. They've got more expensive ones with higher range, but hey, 267 miles, pretty good. Top number 2 in over the last 3 years have been Chevrolet with the Bolt. They've got the price down to $31,500 with 259 miles of range. And then they've got an EUV, which is a little bigger. That's the car I have at $34,000. Then a friend of mine's got the Kia Niro, nice car, Hyundai Ioniq. Another friend of mine has a VW ID4, great car. Ford Mustang, they're selling like hotcakes right now. It's hard to get them. 270 miles for the base model. And the Kona just dropped its price, $5,000. And oh my gosh, Nissan has dropped the leaf through the floor. I think that's in anticipation of a new car coming out soon, which will cost more money, but have a lot more range. So anyway, that's the kind of the state of the fair. If you don't like these, there's like 30 more out of the, coming out on the roads, either out right now or coming out within the next year or two. Now, some people never buy a new one, so they want to buy a used one. So I wanted to share this, and I'm not trying to sell Volkswagen. This car stopped being sold in 2019, but there's a lot of good used ones. So we bought this for my wife. I have the one with the bigger range, and she wanted one, and she wanted something like a Honda Civic. And so we bought a 2016 VW e-Golf. It has an 80-mile range. But most people drive 37 miles a day, and she doesn't even drive 37. So this is just fine for her. We bought that for $12,500, 22,000 miles on the odometer. And at the time, we had 78,000 miles or 5 years left on the battery warranty. Hey, sign me up. So that's an example, whether you go to Carvana, Current Automotive, or whatever, something you might want to do if you don't want to go get into a new one, assuming you can get the used one. Now, I think you can. I just was on Carvana. There's a lot of these, but you can get, I'm not pushing this car. It's a great car. Golfs are great cars, but maybe you want something bigger, maybe a Leaf, something like that. So think about it. Now, the other thing about EVs is the issue of the current state to the future state, because charging or fueling is just like way different. And a lot of people don't know this. So here's an example. If you have a gas car, ICE car, internal combustion engine car, this is where you go for fuel. Big signs, they're right on the corners, very obvious to see, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to go there. But if you have an EV, you don't go there. In fact, most people, 88% of the people charge at home. Now, some people have a problem. I don't want to minimize that people in apartments could have challenges trying to do this. And that's something that we really have to have government help us with. But right now, 85 or 88% of people that have an EV tend to charge here. And what they do is they plug in every night and they start every day with a full battery. So in the case of this car's 250-mile range, every morning it's 250 miles. So if you had a gas car that filled its gas tank up in your garage every night, would you look for a gas station the next day? So probably your answer, hopefully you say, no, I wouldn't. Now, on a trip, you would, of course. And on a trip, that's why we need more DC fast charging stations, because people go on trips and there's a lot of them out there. There just isn't enough of them. So where do you go? If you wanted to find one, you would go to something like PlugShare or ABRP, and you would just pop in where you want to be. It's a navigation system, and it would show you, this is an example of all the chargers in the Chicagoland area. And all the orange ones are super fast ones called DC fast charging. And the green ones are slower. And where are they? Well, they're here. This is 2.5 miles from my house. There's a Myers parking lot. If you go shopping there, you may not even know it's there, but over on the right-hand side of the parking lot, there it is. Lots of Tesla chargers, and there's 4 Electrify America chargers that can charge 8 cars simultaneously. So this is how people start every day with an EV, so much different than a gas car. So what I'd like to do now is to kind of sum up the EV and go on to the next topic by looking at some of the things that are important to understand about them. So first of all, I mentioned the range. The average range is running about 250 miles, and the average driver drives 37. So if you start every day full, that's pretty good. Now, I'm not saying 300 is better, and you can buy, EVs with higher range, but really 250 is pretty good nowadays. You charge at home, as I mentioned. Finding chargers never a problem. And it takes 8 seconds to charge. And some people are going to say, what? Well, it takes 4 seconds to plug in, and it takes 4 seconds to unplug. Because you do other things, it actually takes longer. So with 37 miles, that would take about 2 hours to recharge the car up to whatever level you were at. But if you go 60 miles, it's going to take 3 hours to charge or something. So it depends on how many miles, how long it takes, but it almost doesn't matter because by morning it's full, whatever it takes. Okay. Now, the charger that comes with the car can only do about 40 miles overnight. So a lot of people are fine with that. And so you need this level 2 240-volt charger if you want to drive more than like 40 miles a day, kind of a thing. So that's just a guideline. Now, the other thing that prevents people, though, from going to an EV, and I'm trying to paint a picture of the future, so hopefully if you don't have one, you'll get one, is according to Consumer Reports, EVs are about $3,000 to $8,000 more than a comparable ICE car. Now, with that said, most people can, not everybody, but most people can can access a $7,500 tax credit. Depending on your tax situation, you may only get $4,000, but let's just say that. So you can see how the tax credit can compensate for the extra cost of the vehicle, or at least a good portion of that. So that's something to keep in mind. The next thing is, on average, electricity is about 1/3 the cost of gasoline. So according to Consumer Reports and calculations that I've made, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200 you can avoid in costs by going with an EV. It's cheaper. It's just way cheaper. And then according to Consumer Reports, the maintenance is $345, which I think is way off. I think it's way higher than that. You're not getting oil changes and antifreeze and all of that kind of thing. But let's just go with what they have. So you add the two and you come up with $1,545 less per year, or 9 cents a mile. So if the EV is more expensive than the ICE car, it might not be with the tax credit. And if it's still more expensive, you're going to pay for that car all the time, every year, with the amount of money that you're not going to be spending in fuel and maintenance and things like that. So that's just something to think about. The other thing is on emissions. They're zero emission vehicles, but let's face it, the upstream emissions of charging is an issue. So in the case of Naperville, I think we're something like 80–90% coal. So it's going to not be as good as somebody who's on ComEd or in other places of the country. But on average, you'll avoid at least 65% of the emissions on an average mix, according to the EPA, across the United States, okay? And the beauty of this, as the grid goes green, the car will go green in proportion to that. So that's nice. And also, there's no pollution with the car. Now, there's a lot of things to say that I said earlier about, 9 million people dying a year of pollution. So some portion of that is obviously, and maybe half of it is transportation or vehicles. So I put down 2 million. Listen, don't bank on that. I'm probably going to take that off the screen. Large numbers of people die because of emissions. And some of it, or a lot of it, has to do with emissions, pollution from cars. So just use that as a guideline. And then they all perform really well, probably around 200 horsepower or more. And it's actually better, it seems better than that, because they don't have an automatic transmission to do shifting and everything. So they have instant torque. And then people worried about the battery should consider that there's an 8-year warranty on the battery, or 100,000 miles. The average person keeps a car for 8 years. So the average person is going to be on 100% warranty with the battery throughout the life of the vehicle. Now, if you keep the car for 12 years, of course, there's an exposure to you and batteries are expensive. But if you compare the cost of the battery to an engine, an internal combustion engine, or an automatic transmission, those things are extremely expensive too. So with that said, I just wanted to do a quick cost thing. The Hyundai Ioniq EV at $33,000, $7,500 credit, is effectively about $25,000. Operating costs over 12 years, you could use 8 and just do the math again, would be the $1,200 a year in fuel, or $14,000, and the maintenance would be $345 a year, or $41. So whatever math, challenge me, please, after this meeting, to sit with you and do the math with you on a car that you may want to look at, or give me feedback, after this meeting about this. But the point I'm just trying to make here is the EVs are the cheapest way to go versus a nice car. In almost every case, you're better off. Get over the upfront because the operating cost is so low. Okay, so let's go on to number 2. These will go a little bit quicker. Electricity generation, 25% of emissions. Obviously, solar power, whether it's on your roof or whether it's utility solar, is something green, which means you could do that. And personal storage system, totally optional as to whether you want a battery and want to use a battery or not, which is kind of nice if the grid goes down, you stay up. The wind power, most people can't do. But in storage systems, efficient grids, the hydropower, the geothermal, and the nuclear, those are things we have to vote for people to do the right thing with that. And so I'm not going to deeply cover that, except to say one of the things we can do in addition to an EV is solar power, which we have done. So here's an update. One of the largest in the world just went live in Thailand, and it's floating. It's on water. In Australia, they have tremendous solar power there. 1 in 5 homes has solar. The Vatican's on solar. Bangladesh, they put solars on huts and have a little battery so they have power at night for the neighborhood type of a thing. And these utility scale solar systems, well, the wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine. So you have battery systems like Tesla, these Tesla battery systems that you see here, to keep the grid up, keep it up if the wind doesn't blow or whatever. So that's the story on kind of energy. Let's go on to buildings. So buildings would be your home and your business. And we can do a lot here. So I mentioned solar power. Well, here's where you do it, in your home. And I'll tell you what we did in just a second. LED lighting, insulation. The cost I spent on insulation, having an energy person come in with the infrared guns to tell me where I needed to insulate and helping me figure out what to do. I'm certain it paid for itself. I'm just certain of that. Same thing with the windows we did 10 years ago. They were terrible. The heating and air conditioning system, make sure it has a high CRA for the AC, or or it's a heat pump and you don't use, a conventional natural gas heater at all. How about the electric stove? We have a gas stove still. So we have to think about going to an electric stove or an induction stove, electric stove, smart thermostats and low flow fixtures. So these are the things that you can consider, and I'll make these slides available to everybody to help you move forward. So here's our house in Naperville. We have 27 solar panels. Half of them are on the front of the house and the other half are in the back. And so we power our house with 95% of our power over the course of a year comes from these panels. And we also power our two cars, the two EVs in the driveway that you see there. And so my impetus for doing that was reducing emissions. It was just huge. When I found out that the city of Naperville was giving me power from coal, I got pretty upset. So I started looking into this, finding out how much would it cost for me to do this. And a friend of mine went zero down. He leased the panel, zero down. He pays $89 a month. He's fully on solar power. And he's avoiding about $150 a month, I think, electric bill. So his electric bill is paying for his lease for the panels. In my case, I didn't do that. We bought them. The good news about this is if you buy them, you're going to only pay about 1/3 of the MSRP for the solar panels. So between federal incentives, state incentives, which have come back now, and even the city of Naperville, you can defer the cost dramatic. So if the panels did cost you 20 or 30,000, just say 30,000, they're really going to cost you 10,000. And oh, by the way, your home value just went up in proportion to the panels because they're an advantage on a resale of the house. So that's something to consider. This is why we did this. And now, yes, in the month of December with the short days and the cloudy days and the snow, we pull more from the grid than we do the panels, but that is not true for most of the year. Okay. So here's an example of our energy grid in May. The blue bars would be every hour, the energy that we use right down here. And the green bars represent what power the solar panels produce. So you can see almost 9 kilowatt hours. Anything over the blue bar is sold to the city of Naperville. So if you get power from the city of Naperville, some of that power might have come from my panels, okay? But the bottom line is you can see we were at 368% right here for that particular day. And I've saved in my first year, I think it's $750 versus what I would have paid for electricity in the city of Naperville. All right, so let's move on to agriculture, food, and land use. The picture that we're trying to paint here in green is healthy food guidelines. So in the old days, the USDA had a food pyramid, and now that's called MyPlate. You see it up in the top right. Now the MyPlate basically recommends, favoring plant-rich diets and things like that. So, one of my daughter's a vegetarian, and I'm proud of her. I'm not, I'll be honest with you. But when I looked at the food that I ate, I just love burgers and beef. I'll be honest with you. And so my doctor's been telling me for years, I really got to cut back on beef. When I looked at climate change and I looked at what beef was compared to chicken, it was like 5 times worse in the environment than chicken. I started to wake up and say, wait a minute, if it's good for my health, it's good for the planet. And that's a fact. So that's what's guiding me today. I haven't sworn off it, but I'm cutting back and trying to eat more healthy, which is good for the planet. Reduction of food waste. I hear we waste 25, 30% of all food, which is really a tragedy. And composting, if it's in your wheelhouse. Now at the bottom, climate reality, we're working on things like regenerative agriculture, presentations, farmers, helping them see the new way to do fertilizer and things like that. Peat land protection, forest management, et cetera, that you see down there. These are things we can vote for, but we can't do ourselves. So we want to focus on what we can do and then encourage governments like states and the federal government to do the right thing. So industry is really a difficult thing. The future looks more difficult here. In the white areas, we can do these things like solar, wind, and battery for factories and things. We can be more efficient, LED lighting and all that. In my view, we can do bioplastics instead of real plastics, right? Regular plastics. Some of these other things that are in kind of a tint or red tint are difficult, like clean refrigerants, green hydrogen, clean solvents and aerosols and things like that. So there's a lot of good experimentation on refrigerants, as you see there, R32, HFCs and things like that. But there's a road ahead. So we actually have to do like way better in all the other areas than ordinarily we would, because we don't have all the solutions for things like green hydrogen right now and green steel right now. Those are being worked, okay? So understand we have to overdo others in order because of this, because it's huge. So in the circular economy, these things help reduce emissions, like we need to abandon single-use plastics. So, you know, as you go down the aisle at the grocery store and you see all that sodas and, you know, Cokes and Pepsis and everything in plastic bottles, I would say no. I would say we have to go as much as possible. We have to get, you know, the cans, the aluminum cans, and recycle the cans. It's pretty hard totally to eliminate plastics. That's why we have to vote for regulation to make those things more difficult to even put on the market. But we can start right now avoiding those things, and we can start recycling. We recycle here in Naperville. And down at the bottom, you see processes like products designed for reuse and repair, products designed for recycling. So there's a lot of things that industry has to do that we can work with industry to help them, but we can't do it on our own. So with that said, this is a summary of everything that I've just said. And the green things are easy or easier things than some of the white things that I talked about. So as we start to bring this presentation to an end, we'll end with a few slides that talk about that we really have two choices here facing us. We can choose to transform our world, or we will be transformed by nature on nature's terms and in nature's way. We want a world that's more like the left of that picture than the right of that picture. But you know what? We can't have the left anymore because of what we've done over the last 50 to 100 years. But we want to make it as good as we can, recognizing that we've already polluted ourselves in the atmosphere, and it would take a century just to undo a lot of that. So with that said, we get this current situation leading to the desired situation of this carbon-free future. We want to use where we want to go to pull us out of where we are. We have to imagine and affirm the EVs, even if we don't have them, the solar panels, even if we don't have them. Because as we think about these things, as a man thinketh, sort of, as we think about these things, we can pull ourselves away from pipelines and all this other stuff and do things that are better. EVs are better than regular cars, for example. So with that said, we look at, for example, what are the top solar states? Other than California, they're all red states. And you would say, wait a minute, what do you mean? North Carolina and Florida? Those governors don't even believe in climate change, but they're the leaders. And in wind, Texas, big oil state, they're the biggest, gigantic wind farms and stuff in that state. Iowa, Oklahoma, way lower is Illinois. We're way behind these other guys. So we look at that, we say, what's up here? What's going on? It's money. We have to start talking money. That's why I spent time on money on EVs and a bit of money on solar panels, because I want you to see these things are possible. We have to work it. We have to think about it. We have to do the budget. We have to see how we can finagle these things, but we can do it. Texas knows how to do wind because it makes money for them. So what is business doing? 240 companies, here they are, making a commitment to net zero and all of that kind of stuff. For example, Apple's 100% renewable in 43 countries. Amazon says they're going to get there by 2025. They bought 100,000 Rivian trucks. Google has been net carbon neutral since 2007, covering their emissions, but they say they're going to be carbon free by 2030. And Amazon says they were carbon neutral in 2012. They want to be negative. They want to capture carbon, and then they want to go back in the entire history of the company, of the company, and make up for all those emissions through carbon capture. Let's see what happens. But this is leadership in business. Business knows that money talks. So when we talk to people about what to do, whether it's the Naperville City Council or whatever, we've got to talk money. These states get it. 24 states representing 55% of the American people have formed a climate alliance. Look at them. And then remember the ones that are not part of the coalition doing so well in these emissions, low emissions areas that, as I talked about. So what do we need to do here? Well, actually, the hint from the CEO of a top fossil fuel company came out recently in a quote, and he's really hinting what we need to do. Climate change is the biggest challenge facing the energy industry, he says. Yeah, that's an understatement. He says, well, but the energy industry is not the biggest challenge for a world trying to tackle climate change. We just sell what customers want. Now, when I first read that, perhaps you had a similar reaction when I just read that to you. Perhaps you thought, wait a minute, they've been greenwashing for 30 years or more, 50 years. Well, that's all true. But if you think about the point he's making, there is something to it. We buy gasoline, don't we? Now, we can argue that there was a time when there weren't enough EVs on the road, and there still isn't quite enough, don't get me wrong. So we bought gasoline. It was the normal thing to do. But now we're getting to the point that we can now move away from their gasoline. We can now buy the aluminum can sodas instead of the plastic bottles. So there's so many things that I've talked to you tonight about the things that we can do. And I'm going to summarize them in just a second. So we got to throw that thing and take him up on his challenge. It's past time to turn the tables on the fossil fuel industry. We need to stop buying their poison, and we need to review the to-do list. So let's look at the to-do list real quick. I mentioned this, the EVs, cheaper transportation, take me up on it, glad to work with you. Solar panels, same thing. And if you can't do it because you're in an apartment or a condo, find out if you can get them to do it. But while you do that, if you live in ComEd territory, I believe you can do community solar, save 20% of your money, and be green. How about recycling? How about eliminating plastic bags? How about eliminating plastic bottles, as I mentioned, going down the grocery aisle? How about looking at products like Myers and certain toilet paper brands instead of maybe what you bought in the past? They all have a carbon footprint. How about your home insulation? Look at that waste that they're talking about. How about that heat pump or the hybrid heat pump or heat pump, full up heat pump from A.O. Smith there on the hot water heater? What about the electric stove? I'll be honest with you, I don't think my wife's going to like it because we haven't done this yet. We have a gas stove still, and it's really good for cooking, but we need to take a look at this. And there's also induction stoves, electric stoves as well. We need to take a look at this, especially if ours breaks. And then we have the MyPlay guidelines that I talked to you about, the LED bulbs. And this is the year I'm going to look at firing our bank because you see, they're financing fossil fuels. And I'm upset about that. I'm not sure where to go, but that's on the project list right now. And finally, the whole voting thing. So as we look at this, we envision this new tomorrow. Here's a condo with the EVs sitting out there in the driveway, with the heat pumps in the driveway, in the charging stations, and the solar panels. We think about it, and the more we think about it, the more we find ways to figure out how to do it. Because, you know, the day is coming when our children will sit us down in our dotage, in our old age, and look at us straight in the eye and whisper to us, you knew, and you didn't do anything about it. Why? So if they haven't already asked you that, they're going to. So think about it because you want to have an answer. I want to have an answer. What did I do? Not what Biden should have done or Joe Manchin should have done. Hey, if we wait for Congress, we're dead. So I'm thinking, what are we going to do and hope in let's rally the forces and vote. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we have to look at us in what we need to do right now. Because if the climate change crisis were World War II, it's 1939. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor is just a couple of years later. So we can argue that it's 1939 and we knew we had a problem. Or is it 1935? Do we have a little more time? Well, we don't have a lot of time, that's for certain. So Dave Sagg makes a good point here. And given that point, we have a wonderful world that we want to protect. And it's the only world we have. So thanks a lot for listening to me. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Tom. I just want to vouch for induction stoves.
Oh, good.
They're awesome. And you get, natural cooking with natural gas is really unhealthful. And so you get the health benefits also of not having natural gas in your home. So I highly recommend that. So yeah, the future that I envision is like all electric homes, electric transportation. For people like me that can't have solar, like I have access to community wind and solar. Yeah, I think, and also I think we're going to have healthier air to breathe, which is, important. And, if we are successful in stopping emitting greenhouse gases, we're also going to not get so hot.
Yeah. I'm not recommending, as I think I told you the other day, Kathy, I'm not recommending we cut trees down and put solar panels up.
Right.
Not.
Right. Increased biodiversity. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Thought it was terrific, Tom. Thanks so
Thank you.
much. It was terrific. It's inspiring and also daunting.
It was a challenge. I'll be honest with you, it was a challenge for me because this topic that Kathy picked was really big. I'm sorry, Bill?
It's great. It was
Thank you.
well-researched, and excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.
It's also timely for me because my husband is looking to buy a used EV. So
I have an EV presentation and I have recommendations on what to do and what not to do. Anybody ready for it?
I'll have him contact you. All right.
All right.
Any other comments or questions?
I have one. Well done, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have you given, so I find that a lot of times people's vision of the future is a very techno future. We have all these great tools that to leverage. But one thing that I don't hear addressed very often is the probable fact that there'll just be less electricity in general. And thinking about some of the technologies that have gone away that are worth bringing back. Things. Have you given any thought of any technologies that we don't use now that may make sense to bring back?
Did you have a suggestion as to one might be?
Well, a manual typewriter, or even maybe hand press, and more of a localization instead of global.
I don't think so, because if you do the math, again, the science behind solar and wind, we have gobbled. I mean, nature's been running the world on solar and wind since the beginning of time. There's plenty. We just have to say, if there's a roof and sun hits it, we need to put a panel there. If we start doing that and we start putting up turbines where there's wind, we can generate tremendous. I mean, Australia had a problem where they had too much energy because they have so much solar and wind. So I don't think energy will be the problem. I think heat will be the problem, though, because no matter what we do to get in front of this, can you imagine if you had a car going down the road at 60 miles an hour and all of a sudden you took the foot off the accelerator and it went up to 75 and it went for 10 miles before it started slowing down? That's like our atmospheric system. You know, what we see in here is going to get worse for at least a time before it gets better.
Great, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you again,
Hey, Tom.
Tom.
okay.
Oh, one more
Hey, Tom.
question?
I got a question. It seems like there's a lot of really hot EVs that are not available in the Midwest yet. Do you have any, and I don't know how many models of those that you showed are available here. I know the Tesla obviously is out there, but do you know, is there going to be a shift in what is offered in our area?
Yeah, so it's really coming. It's going to be coming strong. There's at least like 22 of them going to be introduced next year alone. There's EVs that haven't come here because we're such a terrible market. So I didn't have time to include the slide that basically says the United States is at 2.5% of new cars hitting the road are EVs today. It's going up quickly, but if you're in Norway, it's 75%. Every 3 out of 4 cars hitting the road are EVs. 50% of the EVs in most of the Nordic nations, the coldest places on earth, are EVs. So don't worry about cold. Yeah, it reduces range, but they run just fine. So we look at the rest of the world, we're just way behind, but I believe we'll be catching up because there's a lot of people, whether it's liberals or conservatives, that are starting to really get the word. Look at what Tesla's done. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Yeah. Folks can reach out to Tom afterwards if they
Sure.
want particular advice.